All right, I think we're ready to kick things off. I want to thank everybody for joining the webinar today. We're excited to share with you and discuss the latest local marketing updates and glad that everyone can be with us today. This is the fourth webinar we're doing as part of our Navigating the COVID-19 Pandemic series, where we convene our local marketing experts and provide the most up-to-date, actionable information that multi-location brands can implement right now. And if you've joined us before, welcome back. And if you happen to miss the previous webinars in this series, all of the recordings are available on our website on demand. And you can go to rioseo.com/COVID-19 to find those. Just a few reminders before we go ahead and get started. We do have all attendees on mute throughout the webinar today, but as I mentioned earlier, we welcome any questions and you can send those to us throughout the webinar by locating the Q&A button on the Zoom control panel at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer as many questions as we can live today, but if we don't get to your question, we will be sure to follow up with you afterwards. And feel free to send us any additional questions via email at marketing@rioseo.com after the webinar, or if you're following along on Twitter at @rio_SEO. And lastly, today's webinar is being recorded and we will send the link to you within 24 hours, so please look out for a follow-up email from our team. And before we dive into the content today, let me briefly introduce myself and today's panel. My name is Justin Gianninoto, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Rio SEO. I'm excited to moderate today's conversation, and I'm fortunate to be joined by two of my incredible colleagues who hopefully you've gotten to know if you've joined our previous COVID webinars. We have Krystal Taing, who is the Director of Local Strategy at Rio SEO, and also a Google My Business Gold product expert. We also have Ryan Weber, who is the Director of Client Success at Rio SEO. Thank you both for being with us today and welcome. And before we go ahead and jump into the content, just thought we'd start with something fun. I know throughout this quarantine, we've definitely been cooking a lot, but it's also trying to support our local businesses, and we've been ordering some takeout. So I'm curious, what's been your guys' go-to takeout throughout the past couple of weeks? Krystal, we can start with you.
So thanks, Justin, for the intro. Glad to be here. My favorite takeout has been this local Hawaiian restaurant in San Diego called Homestyle Hawaiian. They have like 2 or 3 locations, but it's one of those restaurants where everything is great. So we've been making our way through the menu and just trying a different dish, every couple days. And now that it's hot, I think on Wednesday we hit like 95 degrees in San Diego. They have like an amazing Hawaiian slushie. So it's just been awesome. We haven't gotten tired of it, and it's been great to support them. They've got, great policies for pickup and delivery. So it's been awesome, and I recommend anyone that's supporting their local restaurants to also go in and leave them a review. Even if you haven't gone to them recently, they'll definitely appreciate that feedback.
That sounds awesome. You'll have to share that with me after the webinar.
Oh yeah, there's one by the office. So if we ever make it back there.
Sounds good. How about you, Ryan?
Yeah, for me, so I'm up closer to LA. I'm in Redondo Beach. We've got a local Italian restaurant here called Bettolino Kitchen. The food is amazing, and we have dined in many times. But the big kicker with delivery right now is they're doing 50% off their wine list. And they have a really good wine list. So getting that 50% off has been a go-to for us the last several weekends here. I think it's an essential ingredient to make it through quarantine.
That's great. Definitely good to continue supporting all the local restaurants. And with Mother's Day coming up this weekend, I'm sure a lot of people will be utilizing that as well. So thanks, guys, for sharing a little bit about that. And again, excited to have you both with us today. So we'll go ahead and jump into the content that we're going to cover today. We're going to kick things off with some of our top recommendations for brands as everyone begins to navigate this reopening process. Then we're going to talk a little bit about some GMB updates that have come across over the past couple of weeks. So some updates with virtual care links and the display of COVID-19 testing sites. It's relevant for healthcare brands. Also some updates to new attributes, as well as some things that we're seeing with COVID-19 posts, and then the latest on Google reviews and Q&A. We're going to touch a little bit on local inventory and Google Shopping free product listings that were announced. And then we'll wrap things up with GMB, a little bit on the new API release that came out last week, and then just touch on the latest that's going on with Bing as well. And as I mentioned, feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar, and anything that's not on this list, we'd be happy to answer. So let's go ahead and kick things off. As I mentioned, reopening is definitely a hot topic right now. For most brands, nearly every vertical, they're in the process of, or maybe have already reopened some locations. So, how do they do this effectively as we progress to this next phase and some of these restrictions ease? Obviously, it's going to be specific to certain states and regions, and there are a lot of considerations, but especially with a multi-location brand who may be able to only open a subset of locations and others gradually as more restrictions ease. Krystal, we'll start with you here, and want to give you guys both an opportunity to weigh in on this one, but can you shed some light on some of the things that brands should keep top of mind as they begin to reopen their locations?
Yeah, I would probably focus on two elements. I think because Google made changes over the last few weeks, so the way that you were maybe temporarily closing locations at the end of March may have been different than what you were doing at mid-April and end of April. So I think kind of level setting first, seeing where all your location stands. I know with the brands we're working with, not all are using special hours, not all are using temporary closed status. Even within the same brand, we have some locations that are marked temporarily closed and some that have leveraged special hours. So I think in the flurry of all of this stuff happening, taking a moment to level step and say, okay, this is where we're at. These are all of the locations we have impacted, even getting a full export, whether it's from, your SaaS platform or from GMB directly, and making sure that you know exactly where your locations stand, which ones are temp closed, which ones have special hours through which state, and then making sure that that's updated going forward. I would also keep in mind that with temporary closures, you can also leverage the opening date field. So typically this was used for future opening locations. So if you have a new build and it's opening in 3 months and you don't want someone to go leave a review when your location's not open, you can preemptively publish that to Google with a future opening date and it would display properly. Now with your temporary closed locations, you can also leverage that field. And while the location will say temporarily closed, it will say opening on this date. So just make sure that you're double checking the current status of locations, aligning that with when your locations do begin to open, leverage the opening date if possible in conjunction with the temporary closed status. It won't work with special hours because that's technically still open on Google. And then, just keeping an eye on how that looks to consumers and updating it if necessary.
Thanks, Krystal. A lot of good insight there. And obviously, a lot of this is shifting pretty rapidly. We're going to touch on some of the new attributes that have come out, which are another opportunity for brands to feature some services that are available. Ryan, anything else to add there?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, right, the attributes. I think that's something we'll talk about a little bit later on here. Other things that you could be doing, though, I mean, Krystal laid out a really good sort of tactical plan there. I think you want to probably spend some time thinking about on-page updates as well, right? So in addition to just making sure that the hours are correct and the attributes indicate that you're accepting guests or shoppers physically inside the store, if there are any kind of measures you're taking to, for example, limit the number of guests, or if you're in the restaurant vertical and there are sort of social distancing rules that are going to be in place, using both on-page messaging on your local landing page for those locations, but also Google Posts, right, are a great area to message those types of updates. And even though your hours may be updated and correct, we've seen a lot of instances where just given the amount of uncertainty right now, consumers are still calling, right, or maybe sending a message to ask or to verify. So if you have that extra layer of verification, either on page or in a Google post, you can probably help cut down some of that call volume and answer those questions in advance.
Absolutely. And One other aspect I wanted to make sure that we touched on that we're definitely seeing, and Krystal, maybe you can just touch on this as well, is in terms of location names. What should brands be doing there that may have made updates to location names? What's the most current guidance on that?
Yeah, so what we've been suggesting is to leverage location names to provide updates to customers where there's no other option to communicate it as clearly on GMB in particular. And I think what we've seen is Google make a ton of changes to availability of attributes, visibility of things like COVID-19 posts, that in most cases, those edits to names are no longer required. So as much as you can make updates to the attributes to show what types of services are available, publish those COVID posts, update your descriptions, update your on-page content. I think Google has really done a great job of turning around really quickly to get these updates there. That's not necessarily required any longer, that a lot of the changes are clear to customers in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both. I know there's a lot there. We're going to definitely continue to touch on this throughout the webinar, and obviously a lot of opportunities on GMB, on page, as you mentioned, Ryan. So we'll definitely continue to touch on some of these aspects throughout the rest of the webinar, but wanted to spend a minute talking about healthcare, because we've touched on this in the past. Obviously, with the pace of change with COVID, Google has definitely made a concerted effort to prioritize edits for healthcare, added some new functionality for brands to make that information more accessible. And for healthcare providers who are offering COVID-19 testing sites, there are now some opportunities to better highlight different aspects depending on what's available in order to better inform searchers. So, and we've also previously touched on some of the new healthcare links that are available, and there's been a couple updates here as well. So Ryan, maybe you can help describe the updated display in GMB for what we're seeing with testing sites, and a little bit about those new profile links and what we're seeing there.
Yeah, definitely. So this is kind of interesting, right? While the information is displaying in your GMB listing, as far as whether you're offering COVID testing on site, you can't actually control that information through GMB. Google is, understandably keeping a pretty close eye on the flow of information in this space. So if you are in the healthcare vertical and you are either actively or in process of rolling out COVID-19 testing at either your clinic locations or even standalone locations, the only way to get that information onto Google Maps and your GMB listing is directly through a contact at Google, right? So if you're doing that, you probably have already been in touch with them, but if not, and for those that are curious, we can kind of run through what's available there. There's a number of fields, and you may have already seen this in GMB. You can specify whether or not an appointment is required, whether or not a referral is required. Also, you can specify if you're testing all patients or if it's limited to certain patients. For example, in some cases, you need to prove that you reside in the state that you're being tested in. You have a permanent address there. And then the last one is drive-through, whether or not it's drive-through testing or whether you can physically enter the building or the location. And you can also add instructions. So there's a little bit of flexibility there. And every brand and healthcare system is kind of handling this in a slightly different way. But in some cases, users have to register online first, or you may even need to have it like a televisit screening before you can be approved and given an appointment slot to come in and get tested. I think over time, we'll probably see some of those regulations relax as testing supply starts to meet up with demand. But for now, at the very least, Google is giving you the opportunity to communicate those limitations or restrictions. And then as far as the additional healthcare links, right, around telehealth and virtual visit, there's been some renaming and some consolidation of links. At this point, there's two distinct links that are being published to users. They're only published on mobile at this point, but you have the opportunity to publish a sort of general COVID-19 info link. And we've seen a number of cases where Google is actually populating this for you if you're not proactively going to GMB and publishing something, but they see anywhere on your brand site that you've got a page that's dedicated to sharing information about COVID, Google's likely to pull in that URL for you. As far as online care and the telehealth link, this is a really important one. We've seen a huge increase in not only demand, but increase in the number of healthcare brands that are offering telehealth services. And the results have been excellent across our client base where we've implemented these links. So if you are in the healthcare vertical and you, again, are either actively providing telehealth services or are considering it, you definitely want to make sure you have these links populated. And it's a good idea to put a UTM parameter on that link as well, just so you can track through to conversion. But like I said, we've been seeing some very positive results there so far.
Yeah, I was going to add that, Ryan, but you confirmed that. Just, track wherever possible. It allows, internal and external stakeholders to see how powerful local search is. So when things are crazy, you guys might not be paying as much attention to those, but in a couple weeks, in a couple months, it'll help you show the impact that local really had at this critical time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been really interesting to see the consolidation around virtual care and obviously the impact that it's having, and especially with testing sites, how critical that's going to become as this reopening process continues. So a lot to watch out for in that space, definitely. And we'll continue to share some of the results that we're seeing there as well for healthcare brands. But any follow-up questions on that, certainly welcome. As Ryan said, if anyone wants to dive into that further, we definitely can. But outside of the healthcare space, there have been obviously a number of updates as well. And something that we've highlighted before is some of the new attributes that Google has released. And just wanted to touch on some of the newest updates. We talked in our last webinar about some of the new attributes for dining, shopping, and healthcare businesses, such as curbside pickup, no contact delivery, and as Ryan and Krystal mentioned, telehealth. There are a couple new attributes that have surfaced for retail and then something finally in the hospitality space. So Krystal, can you break down, some of these new attributes and where they're displaying how businesses in these verticals should be leveraging attributes?
Yeah, so I believe that it was a few weeks ago, I think I just got off a call with a client and they were, starting to say, okay, now we're in this weird area of reopening where some stores are going to only have curbside pickup, but some will be available for actual shopping. How do we delineate this in terms of communicating it to our, users that see us on Google? How are they going to know the difference? And I think I was, drafting a ticket to Google, and I had just logged into GMB and I saw the new in-store shopping attribute. Which I was like, I think you guys literally read my mind, because it's going to be really hard to navigate this as brands reopen without something like that. So they did roll it out. They did launch it. It's visible on desktop as well as mobile. So if you are a business that's planning to reopen, you're a retailer, and you are offering in-store shopping, definitely go in and enable that in-store shopping attribute. If you're a retailer and you're only still offering curbside pickup, definitely go and disable that attribute, so it makes it really clear to users and consumers what your locations are offering. And a great thing with the attributes is they all can be imported in bulk or via API, so that's been really helpful as we make a lot of these changes. So that was a big one. I think since our last conversation, there's been a few changes to dining where they've delineated the delivery and no contact delivery, as well as like same day delivery. So there's definitely some additional service attributes there. And furthermore, I think Google's kind of taken all of these types of attributes that show how users can interact with your business and group them all together in a services feature within your attributes section. So it's something that I'm keeping an eye on every single day. As a brand or an agency, I would just pop in and look at your attributes every couple of days, because they are changing, and I even I'm aware that there's new ones coming out in the next couple of days. So keep an eye on that, especially anything where you can throw in a link there for users to get more information or connect to an appointment or something to make their next visit with you. So That is really the most recent update with dining and retail. But there was a new attribute that was rolled out to hospitality and hotels just in the last couple of days, and it's the COVID-19 policy for special responders. So one of the things we heard initially is, with the hotel industry, just even across the world, that a lot of them had been converted maybe into part-time hospitals or housing, frontline workers and essential workers. And that was kind of our feedback to the Google team, that we need to be able to display this. We know that there's not a ton of people right now looking for travel, but we also need to make sure that these policies are updated and visible. It's brand new, and as I can see right now, it's only back-end capability, so I'm not seeing it displayed yet on search, but it is something that I imagine in the next couple of days we'll see something hopefully prominent on these hotels that have that opted in, that shows them if it's a property that is offering special deals or discounts or free services to frontline healthcare workers.
Yeah, it's nice to see Google finally giving something back, right, to that poor hospitality vertical that they've kind of left in the dust with so many of these updates. So that's good to see.
Yeah, I felt so bad. Everyone's like, can we update our description and our hours? And I'm like, no.
How about a Google post?
Yeah,
no.
Yeah. So it's not a ton, but it is something right now for hotels.
Definitely a space to continue to watch, and I know that's exciting for hospitality brands. We've definitely had a few questions on that in past webinars, so continue to watch the attributes, and it sounds like there may be some new ones forthcoming. So one of the other key ways to continue to keep customers updated has been through Google Posts, and you've definitely heard us say it time and time again. We've talked about the relatively new COVID-19 post type. And originally, I know that those posts were supposed to expire after 14 days, and I believe that timeline was expanded. But recently, we've seen older posts reappearing. So, Ryan, anything you're seeing there in terms of how long COVID posts are staying live, and how can brands utilize these to best, share some of that information on GMD?
Yeah, for sure. And this one has also been kind of a moving target, right? We had some clients that we published COVID posts for where the post expired after 7 days, like a normal post, only to later reappear, right? And like you said, the most recent guidance was 14. It's since been revised up to 28 days. So that's Google's position at this point, is the COVID post type will remain featured for 28 days. Of course, it'll still be on the profile itself if someone is looking through your updates tab on mobile or is scrolling through previous posts, but it'll be featured for 28. And even that, we should put a little asterisk next to, because we've seen client examples where the post has stayed up for almost 40 days, remain featured, I should say, for almost 40 days. So even that has a little bit of flexibility to it. And I think one of the things that Google's considering here is, as the impact of COVID on local businesses continues to kind of stretch out, I think they're going to keep revising that maybe a little bit longer and longer, because the message, of course, is still relevant as long as those adjustments and operational changes are in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely something to continue to watch there, and would highly recommend, utilizing those posts as a really critical way to continue to communicate that insight. But speaking of moving targets, another hot topic has definitely been reviews, as well as Google Q&A. Through this, so-called blackout period, reviews and images we're not publishing, and over the past few weeks, we've seen these start to reappear. Reviews and Q&A, all these tools are such important barometers for customer sentiment. So maybe Krystal, just if you can talk a little bit about, what the current state of reviews on Google looks like, and what brands should be taking into consideration for their reputation management strategy as we start to head into this next phase with reopening.
Yeah, so the one thing I will comment is Q&A was back and then it's gone again. So I think they're still kind of figuring that out. But reviews are coming back. They are rolling out, we're seeing, for most retailers and food industries in the US. We're starting to see that touch other countries. And then from there, it's going to expand to other verticals. I would probably expect, if you're a vertical that needs additional verification, like a service vertical or like a locksmith, where there's typically a lot of spam, whether with reviews or with data in your vertical, those are going to be the ones that are least likely to roll out. I think those alongside with banking and healthcare are going to probably take a little bit longer. But they are rolling out. Google's just being very specific about how that process is rolled out to all listings. And then we are seeing them backdated. So you will see the date that the review is left. And those are it's taking a bit of time. Obviously, it's a ton of content, but those are here and they're here to stay. Q&A, not so much.
Yeah, I think definitely good news on reviews for most brands, and continue to keep an eye out for Q&A, as Krystal said.
Yeah, I would just add too, for reviews in terms of review strategy. I think a few webinars ago, we talked about Yelp reviews and how they were, taking a stance on reviews around comments that include COVID-19 and that type of thing. I can say that I've seen quite a few reviews on Google that mention COVID-19, mention, maybe negative sentiment around being closed or something like that. So just as a business owner, as a reputation management thought, just make sure you're keeping an eye on those. You have a response or a plan of action to address those, because they are not getting automatically filtered out. There's just kind of the standard guidelines. If it violates the standard Google guidelines, then it could be removed. It could be filtered out, but that's not always the case with COVID-19 related reviews, especially negative ones.
Yeah, good point there on Yelp. So continuing to move along here and switching gears just a little bit, wanted to spend just a moment on product listings. With the recent announcement Google made that any business can now list products on Google Shopping for free. So Ryan, maybe you can touch on just how this might benefit brands that are or aren't currently using product listings, any impacts that this is having with local inventory and GMB that you're seeing with your clients.
Yeah, this is a pretty cool move on Google's part, really, for the SMB, right? And sort of the mom and pop retailer that maybe isn't able to continue to operate, not considered essential, but still, maybe shipping and delivering products. For enterprise, frankly, this really doesn't impact the enterprise, right? It's meant more for SMBs. If you're already leveraging Google Merchant Center, local inventory ads, you're going to be covered and arguably in a better position because the inventory is inherently local, right? It's tied to your locations. If you are in the SMB space or an agency that works with SMBs, there's a good case study that Colin Nielsen put together over at Sterling Sky. Worth checking out, because the product section for these product listings does actually give you some decent additional real estate in your knowledge panel, but the verdict is still out on the effectiveness, right? And I won't ruin the punchline for Colin's case study, but if you guys are curious to check that out, that's a blog post worth taking a look at.
Thanks, Ryan. So staying on the topic of Google, and then, just want to jump into a little bit on Bing before we wrap up and take some of these questions. Last week, Google also announced the release of version 4.6 of the GMB API, and there were a few features in this update related to Google support for service lists, which we've mentioned a little bit earlier in the webinar, which allow businesses to indicate services they offer in relation to business categories. But Krystal, can you talk a little bit about the update and anything to highlight there for brands, maybe how this differs from some of the attributes that we've discussed?
Yeah, so this really is API support for something that's existed in GMB for quite a while, that just cannot be impacted in bulk or via API. So in GMB, you have, based on your primary category, you could have a service menu, which allows you to publish, a list of service offerings, a description, and or a price to your listing, and it displays on mobile. So this is separate from that. This is your list of services, which is kind of similar to the list of services if you're familiar with LSAs or local service ads. If you're launching that, you can include your list of services. It's similar, but not the exact same. But basically, Google is taking primary and additional categories, and they are using their information to assume what services you offer. So if your primary category is, a carpet cleaner, and you do also, they're going to assume that you could also clean upholstery. So you can go in and add that, you can remove it, and then you can also add any other services that Google isn't aware of that you could offer. Right now, they don't display anywhere. They're really just for Google's understanding about your business and how they rank you from a search perspective. But now with the 4.6 release, you can submit that via API. You can pull your category, see what services are available based on Google's understanding, so you know what's being associated about your business, and then also publish those and push updates back to Google.
Thanks, Krystal. Definitely exciting to see some of those updates there for multi-location brands who can utilize those API updates. Before we jump over and just touch on Bing, which is our last question that we had, I want to get to a couple questions that have come in related to GMB. So I'll open this up to either of you, but are there any signs that COVID-19 links will be available for other business types as certain states begin to reopen?
I don't know that would be that's going to happen. I think Google's intention is likely to leverage COVID posts for majority of industries and just keep the COVID-19 link to healthcare, but that could change. They might open up additional, like something like a safety link or CR safety policies or something like that. I know that's something I shared feedback with them, but right now I don't know that that's something that they're considering and are assuming that your information would be in a COVID-19 Google post.
Okay. Yeah, just to add to that, I definitely agree, Krystal. I think the COVID post is sort of what Google is encouraging non-healthcare brands to use to communicate that. The good news is with the COVID post, you can add a link there, right? So you could still have the same landing page that you would use in that COVID info link, but you get an opportunity to add a little bit more context or information. And the other thing that I forgot to mention, I was answering the post question earlier. Within the last several days here, we've finally been seeing these COVID posts appear much more prominently in the knowledge panel or in your listing in maps. So for a long time, it was kind of buried and it was questionable whether or not that many people were really seeing these posts. But earlier this week, we started to notice across a number of brands that the COVID-19 post type is being featured much more prominently in the listing. So, and the other thing, of course, now that it's available through the API, if you are, multi-location brand or enterprise brand, you got a much more scalable way to get those posts published across your footprint.
Excellent. Thank you both. Couple other questions just coming in on Google My Business, and Krystal, maybe you can touch on this. This is definitely something we've addressed in the past in terms of delays on publishing some of this information. Any recommendations for the best way to handle this? And this person's seeing, delays that are much longer than the suggested 3 days. Is there anything that can be done there to expedite that? And maybe it depends on certain verticals.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It really depends on if you are in a vertical that Google needs to review longer. So like I mentioned before, one of the core ones is like locksmiths or maybe like attorneys or something, that a vertical that has a lot of spam in it, Google usually is going to require additional delays. And right now, they just don't have the bandwidth to expedite those. So those are still going to lag. Other verticals, like if you're in a retail or hospitality or dining or healthcare, those should be going through pretty quickly. So if you're still seeing delays and you're in one of those kind of safe categories, I would definitely post this on the Google My Business forum, shoot me, a message, send it to me, on Twitter, wherever you want to get in contact with us, and we'll see what we can do. But I know that most support we've seen for the categories that are safe considered have been turning around pretty quickly. So I'm not seeing as many delays and edits. Verifications, yes, but edits should be almost back to normal for most verticals.
Good news for a lot of brands. Thank you, Krystal. And then one additional follow-up question for you, Ryan, on, I believe this is referencing local inventory. How is Google deciding priority there, who to show first or second with organic shopping? Any insight that you can provide there?
Yeah, this is kind of a different world, right, from local. So it's going to have its own. Google's got their own distinct rules around that. Frankly, it's still relatively new, and I don't know. I haven't personally seen many studies. We certainly haven't looked too closely at it as an organization, since we tend to focus on enterprise brands. But I hate to say I don't have a great answer on the shopping algorithm just yet. But again, as this is a new feature, I'm sure over time there will be more research coming out, and as we have info, we'll certainly share it.
Yeah, I think I've seen, most people say when it comes to shopping, a lot of the information has to be very specific. Like, you can't add keywords. It just has to be the exact product name. Inventory levels could have an impact, but basically Google wants to deliver the product that they believe the user is searching for. And there's not, a ton of other things that go into that algorithm. But yeah, to Ryan's point, I don't think there's been a ton of studies on it, but it is separate from the way we think about local and organic search.
Right. And I think there was also a question there around the study that you mentioned earlier, Ryan, and we can definitely share that resource with you and that link so you guys can access that study as well. Let's just wrap up with our last question that we had here, and feel free to submit any additional questions in the last couple minutes we have here. We'll try to get to as many as we can. But just wanted to spend a moment touching on Bing, and we've touched a little bit on this in previous webinars. There have been some new features here related to COVID. They recently announced a partnership with GoFundMe that brands can utilize to solicit donations. We'll go to you on this one, Ryan. Maybe any more insight there as far as some of the new features Bing has offered to showcase specialty hours or COVID-19 links? Any updates there that you're seeing?
Yeah, for sure. So, similar to other platforms, similar to Google, Bing is giving brands the opportunity to not only publish special hours, right, that differ from your normal operations, but you can also mark a listing or a location as temporarily closed. Similar treatment to what we see in GMB. The other thing that I think is pretty cool is they've opened up an announcements feature, what they're calling announcements. It's basically an open text field, right, that you can share info about COVID. It does allow you to add a URL. So to the other question that we had about, allowing non-healthcare brands to publish a COVID link, that opportunity does exist on Bing as well today. The only thing is it only displays on desktop, right? So it's not going to appear for mobile searches. And then on the GoFundMe point, that's an interesting one. Again, I think it's a admirable move to support local businesses, and specifically small business. So any chain or enterprise brands are excluded from that GoFundMe partnership that Bing is working on. But if you are a small business, it's worth doing. Again, that will also only appear on desktop, but it's a good option. And then one last note on Bing, we've seen a few cases where Bing is actually scraping COVID related content from, for example, your brand page, and potentially publishing that in the listing itself. It seems that is different than the announcement feature that they've made available. So something to keep an eye on if you haven't been focusing on your Bing listings, to at least give it a check and see if maybe they've gone ahead and proactively published something for your brand.
Excellent, thank you. And just as we wrap up here, I know we're definitely coming up on the end of our time here. I just wanted to put up on a screen some of the additional resources we've recently published. Definitely a lot of guidance here on reopening. And as we wrap up, any final thoughts that you guys want to share? I know, obviously this whole reopening process is definitely top of mind, as we mentioned. What would you leave brands with, that should be top of mind? We can start with you, Ryan.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's good news, right? I mean, it's starting to feel like there's some light at the end of the tunnel with things starting to reopen again. But with that, I think it's going to remain as important as it has been to keep your attributes up to date. Krystal mentioned there may be some new attributes that are rolling out, even those that exist already, whether it's in-store shopping or availability of dine-in. And I think curbside pickup, right, is going to continue to be a popular request from consumers for a long time to come. So just because we're reopening, right, doesn't mean that everything's just going to go back to the way it was from a listing management standpoint. I think these additional features will continue to be important, and new features will continue to roll out in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I would just say for brands that are beginning to plan for reopening, don't turn from any programs or any operations that you had while things were temporarily closed. If they were successful, like keep trying to offer those takeout meal kits or the curbside pickup, because I think a lot of consumers, while some may be excited to go in and sit down and have a meal, you're going to have just as many that are still going to be cautious about that. So try to pivot slowly, try to offer both things, especially if those were successful, because they could continue for the next months and even long term to be a great offering. I know there's reports of people saying this is just going to come back in the fall or in the winter, and then you're going to be kind of having to deal with weather issues and those types of things. So try to toggle both and test out what worked long term.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both. I mean, a lot of really good guidance there. Obviously, things are still in flux, but I think that, this is definitely an area to continue to watch out for, as you mentioned, Krystal. And if there were any follow-up questions that we didn't get to today, please feel free to send those to us. As I said earlier, marketing@rioseo.com. Continue to keep an eye out on our website. You can go to this link, rioseo.com/COVID-19, to look for any of those resources. Happy to provide any additional support. We're always here to help. And I'd once again just like to thank our panelists, Krystal and Ryan, for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you, everybody who attended. We appreciate you joining the discussion and contributing your questions. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Continue to stay safe and healthy out there, and we look forward to connecting with you all again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks all for joining.
Thanks, everyone.